Welcome to another special edition of IGN Weekly. We've gathered together the editors of our game channels in order to discuss their #1 choice for the best video games of all time on PC, PlayStation 2, Game Boy Advance, GameCube, and the Xbox. Let's see which titles made the cut.
We thought narrowing down the top 5 list was going to be pretty easy, but actually it turned out to be difficult because we had to leave games off like Pikmin and F-Zero. But in the end, I thought we put together the really strongest list available for GameCube. And we're talking about titles like Metroid Prime, Resident Evil 4, Wind Waker, Eternal Darkness, and Smash Brothers. These are some great games. Overall, and when it came down to it, at the wire, we really stood out between Metroid Prime and Resident Evil. And, there's a lot of fighting about which game to pick, but in the end, I run the channel, and I'm a big Metroid fan, so I laid down the law.
Well, one thing that Metroid Prime did really well was bring the flavor of the original Metroid series into 3D, which Nintendo's done really, really well with games like Zelda and Mario and things like that, and Metroid is another case for that.
They really pulled it off. Retro really pulled off all the gameplay mechanics that were, in 2D, strict 2D game for years and years, and then they turned it into 3D and it worked extremely well.
That it kind of recaptured that feeling that you had when the original NES game came out. It was the sense of going into some alien planet with Samus and knowing that you've got some infestation going on the world, and you're the only, galaxy's last hope.
The whole thing is this world that's meticulously crafted, so as you wander through and you get new powers, you can come back and get into new areas, and it's kind of unbelievable how well he tied it all together without screwing it up, or you can't really break the game, which I still find amazing to this day.
The thing that really captivated me personally about Metroid Prime was the visuals. I thought it was amazing the first time you go in there and you see the pouring rain when you land your ship for that first time. Just awesome.
One of the things that surprised me about Metroid Prime is it was actually challenging, as opposed to most sort of Nintendo games, like the most recent Zelda, that are just really, really easy to play. And that sort of bothers me whenever I play through them, because I like some challenge to my gameplay experience.
It really made you sit back and go, okay, wait, I'm not just blasting my way through this. I really have to sit back and think out exactly what's going on in this world to clearly make it through.
I really like the fact that they added a lot of little details when you're playing Metroid. For instance, if there's a flash of light, you could see reflection in the upper right-hand corner of your visor. These little things remind you that you're in this suit and you're experiencing what's going on. And being able to go ahead and look up information on anything on the fly, and just walking around and experiencing through Samus's eyes is something you really couldn't do before. And I think that that's one of the reasons it really stood out, especially for me, because up until then, I was a Metroid freak like everybody else, but I'd never really experienced it that way before. And I think that's something that Nintendo deserves a lot of credit for. They took an established franchise and went a different direction with it.
Well, I think Prime proved that you don't need to have a first-person shooter if you're making a 3D game. You can actually make a 3D adventure game. It pulled it off, Yes, there was some shooting in the game, but also the heavy element was exploration, was puzzle solving, and it really stayed true to the Metroid series.
So the Game Boy Advance came out in 2001, and 6 years later, over countless hundred games later, most of them are just SpongeBob and Rugrats games, but there are a bunch of games that are more catered to the old school crowd and the hardcore gamer, and some of them include the Tony Hawk series, really awesome game on the GBA. You got Advance Wars, brilliant strategy game. You got the Legend of Zelda games. Yeah, there were 2 of them that came out, but one of them was the Super Nintendo game, fantastic portable version of it. And then, of course, there are a bunch of Castlevania games. One of the best ones was Castlevania Aria of Sorrow. But all those said, I think the best one on the Game Boy Advance is WarioWare Twisted. That game, brought forth a really cool technology where it turned the system into like an Atari paddle where you can turn it, left and right, and it would recognize those motions. In fact, I'm actually surprised that not a whole lot of people picked up on that game. It didn't sell very well.
WarioWare 1?
And Nintendo is probably teasing that technology because what's in that game is in the Wii system.
You know, you twisted the game to play it. You used a little gyroscope with sensor in there. And so it's more about motion and pickup and just move with your hands rather than use the buttons.
They showed off a lot of really cool ideas 2 years before they even announced the Wii system.
It was certainly a different approach to gaming and control schemes. And so it was sort of, it was one of the first games that Nintendo did where it sort of, you know, they forego the, you know, D-pad or analog stick and buttons and instead gave you something else to play with, which is, you know, what they did with the DS and eventually the Wii. And so I think it was the first step towards, you know, that different design philosophy that they're going with now.
When you're just sitting there, all these little mini games, like, for example, you know, you gotta have someone drink a glass of water, you know, by turning the system, or, you know, just driving a car. They even like made the single level of the original Super Mario Brothers in a round world, so you would tilt the system left or right to run left or right, and hit the A button to jump. Some really, really awesome ideas there, and all those ideas came together in that awesome quick shot form that the WarioWare series is known for.
I actually got into my car, I don't know if you guys know this, but if you get in a car and you just sit there holding the controller and you turn and actually drive around in the car, you'll actually control the game. So, you know, Minnesota, ice cold, you know, whipping cheese in the old parking lot and playing a little WarioWare Twisted.
The PlayStation 2 was the most successful video game system in the last generation by far, and probably ever, so it made it really difficult to hone in on what the best PS2 game really was. But when we finally sat down and talked about it, we came up with a few key titles out of the 2,000 or 3,000 games out there. We had Final Fantasy X, Grand Theft Auto 3, Metal Gear Solid 3, and Shadow of the Colossus. But even those couldn't stand up to our #1 pick, which I think everyone would agree is fantastic, and that's God of War.
The gods of Olympus have abandoned me.
When we first saw in the office, I was like, what is that game? I don't know, you know, kind of heard people talking about it, but I'm like, the name sounds kind of cheesy or whatever, and then when you see it for like 5 minutes, you're like, all right, that's going to be awesome.
Well, I mean, God of War immediately caught my attention just because there was like a sex minigame at the start of it.
God of War was a work of passion. It was a piece of work that David Jaffe's team burned their souls in.
I mean, God of War really is the total package. Everything about it from, you know, the whole way through it has been refined and basically perfected.
Now, as to whether it's #1 on PS2, I have no idea. There are way too many games on PlayStation 2.
I don't think that God of War is the best PS2 game. I know a lot of people disagree with that opinion, but for me, Grand Theft Auto 3 just did so much more than God of War did.
I think God of War is the right choice for PlayStation 2. It's a fantastic game. It's intense. It's gorgeous. The boss battles are amazing.
Intensity, 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 intensity. It was amazing.
God of War is our #1 pick because it did everything well. It's a quintessential PS2 action game, and it's really setting a standard that a lot of the next generation games are going to borrow from.
Part of it had to do with the fact that it was so late in the PS2's system life. It was one of those games that a lot of people didn't really expect could be done on the hardware of the console. And the fact that it managed to provide this epic story with really large vistas and incredible gameplay really showed off the power of what a developer could do with the system once they've actually gotten accustomed to it and know the ins and outs of it.
The control system is fantastic. You have perfect control over your fighting mechanics. You have one of the coolest characters ever seen, or one of the most badass characters at least in a video game.
It wasn't like it was something we hadn't seen before, but it just, everything clicked. It felt like the first like really 3D game, aside from kind of like the Prince of Persia world, where like you're staring at a character that's far away, but you feel totally connected, and you know, I loved every second of it. It was great.
As great as the gameplay was, and as you know, as powerful as all the moves were, none of that would have been accomplished without the amazing visuals that were in the game. I mean, just the special effects when you're swinging your, you know, the blades around, and just, you know, the vistas that you see, and all of these amazingly big creatures, and well-realized world. I mean, that really made the experience what it was.
It's just that sort of in-your-face, sort of over-the-top style, with an actual really good game behind it.
The story made fantastic use of Greek mythology, so you knew the setting, that you could get right in and learn the characters, or you knew most of them, you could just get right into like this one guy and already know what the setting is like. It made its way for lots of violence and gore, which everybody always likes.
An age of games where everyone seems to be so concerned about content and keeping things appropriate, God of War just took a huge budget and just went totally inappropriate. I mean, there was tons of blood in that game, which I like to see. I like that sort of game that's just geared more towards a mature audience. And you know, it had near flawless action gameplay, which is nice to see.
By the time you finish that game, you know you've accomplished something, and you already feel like you can't wait to take on Kratos' role again in the next game whenever it comes out, which